Well, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further in hopes that it becomes helpful for you in your life and your faith. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube or if you are listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts. That way you can stay up to date on upcoming podcasts and content from our Northpoint team here. My name is Jeremy. I'm your host for Overtime today, and I'm sitting here with Buck, our lead pastor. Buck, we are coming off of a big week. We had Camp 75. Summerfest.
It was awesome.
Massive turnout. I mean, like,
fantastic.
Do you know how many? 1,400 people or something like that?
I don't know.
Did I just make that number up out of nowhere?
I like it. Let's go with 1,400. I don't know.
Yeah. But how was your Camp 75 week, Summerfest, Sunday? I mean, how did it go for you and the Giebel House fam?
It's great. Well, here's the thing is that what's really fun is we've grown as a church, and, you know, more resources have been provided from staff and volunteers and all that kind of stuff. You know, when we started Northpoint, I did pretty much everything with everybody. And now it's like, gosh, the team of students and the team of interns and our student director and, you know, just our volunteers and our whole church. It is beautiful, beautiful because, I mean, they're leading and they're, you know, making great leadership decisions, and things just went so well the week at Camp 75. So, you know, Jill, my wife, she was driving, and she happened to drive Luke, my second oldest son, his team. And the whole week, just the celebrations, all the students would come back in the evenings, and just the stories that would be shared, the celebrations, you know, it just felt so galvanizing. It felt so unifying. It felt so like fresh and real, and, you know, we could breathe again, and we've longed, you know, so that was just awesome. And then Sunday, you know, it was cool. Like, I mean, you came backstage second service and said, hey, there are people sitting in the foyer, make sure and welcome them. And so I was like, that is so fun. Yeah. So I was like, hey, welcome, you know, those of you in the foyer that are a little bit more uncomfortable and, you know, can't see jack but a wall and a TV. Yeah. You know, so, but all that being said, just so proud of our team, so proud of our church, so amazed with our community showing up, and it's just really cool to be part of. Yeah.
I mean, 1,800 people impacted. It was like 800 meals to the homeless served in Austin. I mean, it was just a huge celebration of a week. And we had baptisms. We had 2 baptisms in the last week, and people
baptism.
Yeah, taking that step in their faith. And
I got emotional multiple times. Like when I watched that in rehearsal, and then even like first service, I'm sitting back there going, man, I'm up in like, I don't know, 4 minutes, and I'm like, you know, clearing my tears. And it was just, you know, it's when you talk about like the idea, does Jesus change lives? Does that actually happen? Or is it just kind of this religious spiritual thing and people get this high and then go, like, it was so genuine. Yeah. Like it was one of those guys to go, not religious, didn't grow up religious, parents aren't influencing religious, you know, and had lots of questions, and I got it. Like Jesus became Jesus to me, the Messiah, my Savior. And it was so real. And I was like, this is why we do what we do right there. Yep.
I told Wyatt backstage I loved his honesty to go like, I'm going to camp, and I'm either going to decide that none of this is real or it's all real and it's going to change my life because of what it means. Yeah. And that honesty, I feel like is so rare and good. So yeah, it was awesome to celebrate, and we've got, you know, so many more celebrations that are still rolling in, and people, more people want to get baptized and take that step, and so really awesome week. And we kicked off a new series, which I'm very excited about. Called Family Filters, and I've mentioned this on the podcast a number of times now, but we are starting a family currently, and so for me with this series, I just feel like I have my phone out and I'm taking notes, just like I got to remember all of this stuff, so when we get to like families actually here and started, like we can kind of have some handles to go off of, and so maybe
your son is going to be born when?
October.
And his name is what?
I don't know if I can say it on a podcast publicly yet.
I don't know the name. I've been trying to get it out of
you. Next week. I'm going to ask Ashley if I can say it publicly on a podcast.
Okay.
She might be open to it.
Okay.
But for all of our listeners, you have to tune in
I'm
next
still
week.
curious. I think Jill knows, but I haven't asked Jill.
Oh.
And I think maybe Ashley shared with Jill or something. But
I think Josh might have been one of the first to know, because we wrote his name when we were on vacation recently in the sand, and then I was showing pictures, Josh, of the vacay, and I like went past the picture and was like, and I got past it really quick, and he's like,
is it Melchizedek?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I knew it.
Yes. But I got past the picture, and Josh just said, yeah, I saw it. It's like, okay, well, now you know.
There you go.
So, anyways, so family filters.
Yep.
You talked about this idea of ideal versus real, which is so relevant because we all feel this pressure, and it's cultural, it's even spiritual, religious, you know, to have this like ideal, perfect family. And even the video leading into your message was like, hey, you know, pre-picture and then what the picture looks like. It's that whole Instagram versus reality thing. It's like, okay, we put like the nice face on, but then behind closed doors, we all deal with the reality of our own brokenness and our kids' brokenness and our parents' brokenness, and just what that brings and how we manage that. And so, you know, I want to jump in, and on the first question is this, kind of in that ideal versus real lane, is why do you think we as humans, really everybody, why are we so concerned with appearing ideal to others and appearing with this ideal family to other people?
Yeah, I think, I think there's a couple things that hit my mind. I think one is, and maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but I think, you know, there's a scripture that talks about that God put eternity in the hearts of men. In other words, there's almost like this thing to go like, we're longing for something that God put inside of us that is a good thing. Is an ideal thing. Is like, you know, gosh, who doesn't want a great marriage? Who doesn't want a marriage that is, you know, refreshing and invigorating and intimate and fun and adventurous? And who doesn't want to like lean into their, you know, kids as a parent and, you know, be able to love their, you know, discover their son or their daughter's heart and have this really cool connection, and there's trust and there's honor in that relationship, or, you know, pretty much any family dynamic. I just don't think we would go like, oh, I don't want that. You know?
Yeah.
So I think there's a kind of this more, I would say spiritual, some would say natural, longing for the ideal. I think that's just part of it. I think the other part of it, potentially, and maybe this is the more unhealthy piece, is more the identity based. You know, my identity isn't secure. So if I'm not secure in my identity, then I have to post a picture, or I have to, you know, say a certain phrase or certain word so that I can kind of mask my insecurities. And so I think, hey, I'm willing to post that picture and say my marriage is amazing, my kids are amazing, everything's great, you know, because I so long for my identity to be secure, for me to feel good about me, for me to feel good about my season or my chapter in life. And so I think we so want to protect and fight for our identity, and especially when we know maybe it's not great, maybe there's a lot of insecurities, you know, maybe that even turns the temperature up in terms of, you know, fighting for the ideal and posting all the crazy pictures and having to, you know, have the perfect response and the perfect, you know, family and the perfect kids. And that's a lot of pressure. And I just feel like it's unnecessary pressure to put on yourself. But I think that's probably why. I think, you know, a God, spiritual reason, you may say natural. And I think the other piece is just how secure you are in your identity as a husband, identity as a wife, identity as a man or woman, identity as a family, is to go, you know, and I think God provides so much of that. You know, I'm just, man, I always struggle on I talk a lot on Sundays on parenting. And, you know, every day it feels like, or every week it feels like, man, there's a new chapter in parenting, especially with our oldest son, Sam, because it's new chapters. I've never parented an 18-year-old.
Right.
And now, you know, his independence and autonomy and going to college, and, you know, I'm like, oh, and it's just that idea to go, God, you're big enough. I'll be responsible, but you're big enough to handle whatever comes my way.
Yeah. By the time the twins get there, you'll be a pro.
I don't know.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
It's the oxymoron, right? What is it? The parenting expert is an expert is an oxymoron. That whole
You're
thing.
never going to find one. Yeah. I mean, there's some really good principles and really good insights into parenting.
Yeah.
And I think we should learn and glean those. But yeah, so identity is a big one. And if that's not secure, I think we shoot for the ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like community is kind of a really important aspect of that as well. Like when we don't have intentional community,
that's good.
Where we are being seen by others in a vulnerable way, in a way that's scary, because it's scary to be vulnerable and be seen by others. But when we don't have that, we're going to do everything to protect our image.
Sure.
Because we're scared of not being accepted. We don't have a place where we are being accepted. And so, of course, we're going to put up this front and say, like, hey, we're doing fine. Like, the family's great, even when things are hurting, because we want to be accepted.
Well, it's cool. Like when you're around a group of people, and it's, I mean, you can go both ways with this. You could be overly real. You can be like, dude, you're sharing way too much. Like, this is not the time and the place. Like, maybe you and I could go have coffee and we could talk about this. But, I mean, you can go both ways. But when you're around a group of people and they're just really honest and vulnerable and authentic and at an appropriate level, it makes you feel like, okay, I'm not alone. You know, there are real marriage struggles. There are real parenting struggles. There are real struggles on how to honor mom and dad.
Yep.
And so I think that's a great insight too.
Yeah. And it feels like such a myth to assume that, like, just because a family attends church and is all plugged in at church, that family is the ideal. It's just, I know some of the most hurting and broken families who just life happens. And regardless of how plugged into church they are or not, life happens to all families. And it's just a weird pressure we tend to kind of subconsciously put on certain families or individuals. And,
my hope, if you're coming to church, I mean, you just be more authentic about it, more vulnerable about it. I mean, that's why you're coming to church, to go, gosh, I'm going to deal with the reality that maybe I'm not enough as a father, not enough as a husband, not enough as a son. And so, I'm coming here to be very honest and maybe learn some insights and gain some encouragement. And versus like, I'm coming here to be perfect. Yeah. But I mean, I joked about that on Sunday too. The church is some of the worst places to be, to find the masks and the hypocrisy and all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Towards the end of your message, I remember you said it, and I was like, man, that was a great point. And then I looked at the clock, and there were like 3 minutes left. So you didn't really have time to like unpack it more, which is the purpose of this podcast.
Sure.
But you talked about the idea that of honoring parents, because that was a part of the ideal family picture that you painted, that Jesus painted, that Paul talked about. So honor, you hit on at the end that honor does not always mean obey. And I think that's a really important differentiation between those two things. I wanted to see if you could unpack that a little bit more, honor, obey, the difference between the two, because I think whether it's a teenager listening or a 40-year-old with a weird parent dynamic happening, we're all called to honor. But what does that look like, especially once you have generations of family and who are trying to honor one another? Unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, we could talk about this the rest of the podcast. There's so many spokes to this one, but literally the Hebrew word for honor is kabod, and it means it's the idea to give weight, or it's weighty, or it's significant. That's what it means. So I was trying to get the point to go like, this idea to go honor equals obedience. It's far more complex than that, and that's not what it means. What it does mean is to go, you have weight in my eyes, therefore I will listen to you. I will be curious about your opinions and your life experience. I will ask you questions. I will give weight to your answers. I will consider the outcomes. And then the last, if you will, the kind of in a progressive way, the last step then is obedience. To go, I've considered your words because I've given weight and value to who you are. So as a son to a mom, as a son to a father, you're going to go, you have weight. So give weight to your parents. And because they do have life experience, they have learned things. Now, certainly to different degrees, and what have they done with those? But give weight, consider their words, consider their lives, consider their responses, consider their answers, consider their suggestions. And then it goes, as you give weight to those, as a son or daughter, if they're asking you to do something, and I tried to hit on this real briefly, but if they're asking you to do something that is outside, like, what God would ask you to do, if they're asking you to do something that's against the law, if they're asking you to do something that is going to hurt you and your family, like there's a lot of people who are married who go, I'm going to honor my mom, and so they just immediately do whatever their mom or whatever their dad asks them. Well, I think that's a mistake, because that's not what it means by definition. Give weight to your mom's request. But if it's now coming at the expense of your family, to a degree now your family's suffering, that's your first priority. The scriptures say a man or woman will leave their father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Now that's your primary responsibility. But that doesn't negate the responsibilities to honor mom and dad. So I was trying to unpack all of that, is just because what's happened in the past is this is like where church and religion get really messy, and this is, I think, that people don't like this piece, and I don't like this piece, is when you take a verse in the Bible or you take a statement in the Bible and you use it at the oppression, or you use it at the expense of someone. So it's like, wives, submit to your husbands. is a classic. And so it's like Paul is saying this. Well, it's totally out of context, first and foremost. So the context provides so much rich meaning to that. But then a husband will go, well, see, the Bible says you need to submit to me. Well, I think that's really foolish for a husband to do, and I think it's wrong. But in the same vein, this statement of honoring your father and mother, a father says to a son or daughter, you will honor me. The Bible says, the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. You will do what I say. Well, that's a wrong interpretation. And so I think that's what I was trying to allude to, and to free people up, and ultimately to get a father or a mom in with their kids, or kids in with their parents, to a discussion of relationship, to a discussion to go, hey, if your mom and dad, give them weight. They're your mom and dad, give them weight. That's what it means literally. So consider, now if they're asking you to go steal something, don't do it. If they're asking you to go do something that God has asked you not to, don't go do it. But if they're asking you to do something you don't want to, do it. you know, it's like, hey, take out the trash. Well, I don't want to, hey, these kind of, and where it gets sticky is like, hey, I'm dating this person, and mom and dad, you're asking me not to date them. That's where I'm really comfortable with the tension of saying, well, then go to relationship. Consider the words. Sons and daughters, like, be the best son. I said this at the end. Be the best son or daughter you can. In other words, give them weight. Ask them more questions. If you don't understand or you don't agree, that's on you. Ask them. Like, why would you say for me to break up with my, boyfriend? What are you concerned about, mom and dad? What are the outcomes that you see that maybe I don't see? What are the things that you think I see that maybe you don't see, mom and dad? Like, just have that rich relational discussion. And at the end of it is, after you have a rich relational discussion, is if you give weight, and, the final outcome of honoring could be obedience, but doesn't literally mean obedience, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that does make sense. Would you say that, because I think a lot of adults with kids and parents who are in the middle generationally between their family and their mom and dad, they find themselves in a situation where maybe their parents aren't necessarily asking them to do anything specifically, but there's just a relational baggage, relational conflict. There's just this, like, it's not healthy, and it's not a good relationship. But then they're trying to figure out how to deal with that and also, like, protect their family at the same time.
Sure.
I don't know if that gives enough context to the next question, but how would you kind of give advice to somebody who finds himself in that situation? It's not like the parents are asking them to do anything specifically. It's dishonoring to God, but there's a lot of perhaps dishonoring God relational baggage that has been brought up, and they're trying to figure out, how do I honor them? But I also can't let them, like, trample all over my family.
Right.
What advice would you give?
Yeah, and that's fairly layered, and it's probably
fairly layered.
It is. It's a layered conversation. But I think, something that's brought clarity to my mind is the clarity of priority. My priority is my relationship with God. My second priority is my marriage. My third priority is my family. My fourth priority is my extended family. And if I keep those in priority, it's helpful. And so I think if, like, my dad is asking me to do something, I have to think through those priorities and kind of sequentially. And that doesn't, because you can always find priority 1, 2, or 3 before you get to your parents and go, well, there's something that's come up. Again, it's layered. And so I do think honor means to give weight. Give weight, it's your father. Give weight, it's your mother. But you do have priorities, and you do have responsibilities. And if it's coming at the expense of those consistently, habitually, then yes, I think it's really healthy to draw boundaries. And I think the other piece, and this is a whole nother discussion, is sometimes we give rights to our parents when they're not rights. They're privileges. It's a privilege to see my children, for my dad to see my children. It's not a right. It's a right of a father. But then you have to think about a father by definition. What is a father by definition? A father, by definition, I don't have time to go through it, but, is there, it provides wisdom. A father, by definition, is there as you transition into puberty, and going like, what does it mean to be a man? Dad, I'm struggling with all these things. A father, by definition, is there when you're going to college and you're facing all these new temptations and this autonomy and you want to spread your wings and discover your masculinity. He's there to talk and speak wisdom. A father, by definition, is there when you get married and you're like, Dad, here's all these new things, and now I can't think of only me. I've got to think of somebody else. And then, how do you get old well? How do you stay in a marriage when, the honeymoon phase is faded, if you will? How do you parent your kids when they're becoming autonomous and they're fighting for their independence and it feels like rebellion? Dad, so father, by definition, is so many of those things. And oftentimes we want to give rights to a father who is, in the worst case, none of those things, except, technically your father. And this gets on a really slippery slope and requires a whole podcast for this. But I think, if I heard your question correctly, I think priorities are very helpful. And what's your, priorities? I think secondly is the idea there's a big difference between rights and privilege, and I think we get those confused. It is a privilege for your parents to come see your kids. And you have priorities and responsibilities, and sometimes boundaries need to be drawn, and that is the most honoring thing you can do for your dad or your mom. And then I think, there's a whole forgiveness aspect. That's why I'm saying it's layered.
Yeah, it's very layered.
Yeah, to where, you need to work through the steps. And I've shared my story. It took me a year before I told my dad, hey, the most honoring thing I could do to my father was say, don't text me, don't call me. We're not going to have any contact for a year. That was the most honoring thing I could do, because it actually lended itself for a way forward for he and I to have a relationship. And this is not always the outcome, but for us, that was the outcome. And that was the most honoring thing. So, it definitely, there's lots and lots of layers to it, but hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that gives some handles to hold on to in terms of what does it mean to honor your parents if it doesn't mean obey them.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. It as you were talking, it made me thinking, because you said family a few times in one sentence. And have you seen Fast and the Furious?
Oh, the race cars.
The race car.
Eleanor. No.
I don't know
that's
what
a different
that means. Yeah. Way off track.
Okay.
But there's all these memes right now with the new one, Vin Diesel, because he has these lines where he's like, I don't need this when I have family. And it's like, it made me think of that. But
yeah, family's beautiful. Man, when family's strong, like this is why we're doing this series. I so want people to experience the beauty and the unity and the strength and the security and the confidence that comes from, taking steps towards a healthier family, towards a more ideal family. And I think, he's tapping into something. Again, some would call that natural. I'd call that spiritual. He's tapping into the spiritual God-designed piece of you and me and people to go, I long for that.
Yeah.
I want that.
Yeah.
Van Diesel.
Yep. Did you say Van Diesel?
Yeah. What's his name?
Vin.
Vin.
Like V-I-N, right, Josh? Yeah, it's V-I-N.
There we go. I'm very familiar with Vin Diesel.
Van Diesel.
Family, he doesn't mean like legit family. It's like his friends.
Yeah.
So sometimes your friends become your family when you don't have a family anymore.
I'm telling you, I've seen it happen lots of times.
Yeah, we've digressed quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, we have.
Okay, so my next question is in regards to your application, and this was another one where you hit the application, and I was like, there's 2 minutes left now. He's really got to wrap up, and we need to unpack this more. But when we are face to face with the gap between the ideal and the real, what do we do? And that was your application. When we're looking at our family, and there's the ideal, but here's the reality we're facing. And you gave 3 points that we can do, that we can practically take. You said we can be honest, we can go to Jesus, and we can fight for the ideal. Can you unpack a little bit more of what it means to be honest? Just give some examples of what that means when we're in these like family dynamics. What does it mean to be honest, go to Jesus, and fight for the ideal? Can you give a few examples of that, and even just some handles for people to kind of, okay, here's what I can do with my situation?
Yeah, I think I think one of the best things, and I've given this application before, and I took this application from a friend of mine, Jeff Henderson. Where Jeff Henderson, the first time I heard it, I don't know, a decade ago, he said this question, and the question is, what's it like on the other side of me? And that's a scary question to ask. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hear that. Nobody wants to hear they've messed up, or, you know, maybe it's not as ideal as I perceive it to be on the other side of me. Like, I've asked that question to you, and like, I want you, Jeremy, to look at me and go like, man, Buck, it's awesome. You're a superstar, you know? And the reality is, I know that perhaps is not true. And so, am I going to take that information and kind of, you know, provide energy in that information to help me be better so I can actually lead you more effectively? And so I think one of the ways to be honest, just in terms of a handle, is to have the courage and the bravery to ask that question. I've asked that to my boys. I've asked that to Jill. And to sit on the other side in your family and just say, hey, can we go for coffee or for dinner or for breakfast, you know, with one of your kiddos, and, you know, have a conversation, build relationship, and just say, hey, I do have a question for you. I'm just curious, what is it like on the other side of me as your dad? You know, what is it like on the other side of me as your husband? You know, what's it like as if you're asking this as a wife, you know, as a wife? I think that's one of the most helpful questions. And if you create an environment of trust, you can get some incredible, honest information that may initially be hard to hear, but is so catalytic for you to experience what you long for, what Vin Diesel said about family. You know, like, man, I long for that connection. Everything else is like, hey, it's just noise. This family is awesome. Yeah. And so I think asking that question is really important. I think being, you know, that takes a lot of security in your identity. That takes a lot of, like, you know, discipline to go, like, you know, you said this before, you know, just shut thy mouth, whatever they say. Don't be defensive. You just listen and just say, this is a gift they're willing to give me. This is hard for them to say as well. Yeah. So if I can create that environment. So I think that's just being honest, and I think it's like, you know, and I think you know it in your gut if you need to ask the question. Yeah. I mean, there is self-deception, but I think if you have a gap with your son or daughter, or a gap with your mom or dad, or a gap in your marriage, I think it's time to ask the question. It's time to create an environment just to say, hey, I really want you to say, and even give people time to, hey, I've got a question. I'm going to text it. Can you take 2 days and just think about this? Yep. And invite God into that, and then can we have coffee? Yep. I think that's another option. And man, you will get honest. And then sometimes, you know. Yep. Sometimes I know that, you know, I repeat myself too much. Yep. Sometimes I know, like, one of the things my boys have brought up is, Dad, you bring up the past way too much. Can it just be with, I'm on the computer too much? Can it just be my phone, like the other? Can it just be that? And can you not stack on what I did last week and last month and 6 months ago? And just, can it be like, I messed up today? Yeah. And that was one of the pieces of feedback. You know, Jill's given me feedback. I just wish you would just tell me more of what's going on inside of you. Because, you know, I'm a stuffer, and it's hard for me to feel. Yeah. It's much easier than it has been, but I have to provide energy to feel. So that's like, okay, I need to be honest with that. Yeah. Have I, you know, or like I said, have you done anything innovative and creative for your wife that would express to her she has value and she matters in your eyes? And if you can't think in the last week, you know, outside of like, well, you know, darn it, I've gone to work. Well, that's true. But I'm saying, like, is there something that she would go like, oh, he went out of his way for me because I matter to him? And if not, I think that's an honest moment. Yeah. To go be honest with that. Because if those deposits aren't happening, it adds up over time. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think before we go into this next, we have one more question before we get there. I think one of the pieces for me that is difficult when it comes to kind of applying that is swallowing whatever news you get. And I think that's why it is difficult to ask the question in the first place. And so I think I would say to anybody listening and going like, man, that's good. Like, okay, don't just say it's good. Go and ask the question. Like, go do it. Because the information provided is really difficult to hear sometimes, but so helpful relationally. 100%. And it can, if somebody's going, man, I need a complete 180-degree turn in this relationship, that question can be a catalyst to provide that 180-degree turn. Yeah. You know, if you ask it, you discover what those things are, and then you do the work. That's where it goes next. So you know, let's say you ask a question like that, and they give you feedback, and then you go to Jesus. What does that look like? Yeah, I would just tag one other thing on what you just said, which I thought was great, is this is why, at Northpoint, we constantly talk about engage, connect. Because if you get that information, it is hard to hear, but you got to go somewhere with it. Mm-hmm. And if you have relationship, like if you and I had, relationship to where it's like, man, Jeremy, Jill shared this with me. Can we just go grab a beer and just talk about this? And you can say so. And you can be my encouragement. And this is where, the letter of Ecclesiastes says 2 are better than 1. When you fall, when you get information, when there's a gap in life, they can help pick you up. They can be that encouragement. And they can hold you accountable to activate that information to, help you take steps. So, I just think, getting in a men's group, women's group, any kind of group, going to our new webpage that we have, npaustin.com/what's next. I think that's right. Is that correct? Great.
It's also right on the homepage, big orange button.
Yeah, that big orange button. Yep. Click that thing. So, anyways, I think that's I think that's important to add on. And then going to Jesus is the biggest point with that is the idea to go, okay, so you're honest and you feel ashamed or you feel convicted or you feel guilty, whatever word comes to your mind. That's a wonderful thing. I think that's one of the things God put in us to steer us towards what he has for us so we can experience what he designed for us. He's a good God. I mean, if he gave his son Jesus, we say this all the time, he's for us. So if he's for us in our family, and we feel like, here's a gap. Here's what my husband, wife, somebody in my family said what it's like on the other side of me, or I'm really honest. I know this is true. Then what do we do with that? Well, Jesus, he came to give his life for you, and he came to call you to a big ideal. So he came to give his life for you to provide forgiveness, to provide mercy, to provide grace, so that you could go to him and you could go, okay, here's the reality. I've messed up. Here's the reality. I feel so convicted about what I've done. And he's like, well, I see you, and I see what you've done. And I've paid for that too. Yeah. Like, you are forgiven. You are a brand new creation. My mercies are new every single morning. My grace is sufficient. It's called amazing for a reason, because it is amazing grace. It can give you and empower you to get back up today. Put your feet on the ground, pull your shoulders back, and go fight for the ideal. And that's where Jesus, full of grace, full of truth, man, truth can bring conviction. Don't mess with the truth, like I said on Sunday. Don't change the ideal. It's there for a reason, and it's really there for your benefit. But when you fall short of that, man, go to Jesus. He came to offer you hope. He came to offer you rest. He came to offer you forgiveness. Accept that offer. And that's the very thing that allows you to fight from a healthy position, from a secure identity position, from a humble position for what he's called you to in his truth. And that's way easy to say and really hard to do. And that's why I think I said on Sunday, spend as much time as you need to. And if you don't know Jesus, ask all the questions you can about Jesus. Do all the research you can about Jesus, because that's the gift he offers. And it's genuine. It's really empowering to allow you to go experience something you've never experienced in your life in the ideal he called you to.
Yeah. Yeah, and that has to do with our last question, grace and truth, because both of those things play themselves out in family all the time, but not just family, our everyday life. I wanted to ask, in terms of grace and truth, where do you see that we end up leaning one way or the other? Can you give some examples? Because Jesus was all grace, all truth, all the time, is one of the things you said, and he embodied those all the time. Well, Jesus was God. He was perfection, so only he can do that. And we tend to tiptoe this line, this tightrope of grace and truth in our spiritual life, in our family life, in our relational life. What are some examples in family where we tend to go too far to truth? And then I want to talk about what are examples when we go too far to grace side of things.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was like, as a parent, or as anyone, you want to give the truth on the other side of you.
Yeah.
I want to be like, everybody around me, here's all the truth.
But don't tell me the truth.
But don't tell me that what I want is the grace.
Yeah.
I want the grace, because I keep messing up myself, but I'm not going to,
Yeah.
That's where I think, I don't know exactly how to answer this. I think, I can give some examples, but I think, typically it's as Hebrews says, keep your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. As Paul says in Colossians, set your heart and mind on things above. If Jesus can be your center point, then I don't think you get off on this. I do think you get off on this when he doesn't become your center point, and maybe truth becomes your center point. So it's like, here's the doctrine and theology, and here's my truth, and you're not doing it right. And the truth is, what I'm right about. And you kind of forget the grace of Jesus then, because it's all truth. Or equally so, if hey, I want to do this morally. So pick a moral category, and that becomes your center point. And Jesus gets off the center point. Then, you'll do whatever you can to get what you want. I mean, that's, human history. Yep. That's biblical history. Is, hey, did God really say that? And I kind of spoke to this on Sunday.
Yeah, that's where we change the real when we're dissatisfied with it not living up to the ideal. So we change it.
Yeah.
And we can utilize grace as a little bit of a weapon in those moments.
And Paul dealt with this. I mean, read the chapter of Romans chapter 6. In Romans chapter 6, the Romans were going, oh, this grace thing. Oh, so cool. So it's awesome. A license to sin.
Yeah.
So I can do whatever the heck I want.
Yep.
Whatever appetite I want to feed, whatever moral line I want to cross. Well, I can just do it because grace is sufficient. And then their argument, which was an interesting argument, hey, I might as well sin more, because the more I sin, the more grace there is. And the more elevated grace will be, and the more people will see grace. So I should just do what I want to do.
Those crafty Romans.
Well, we do the same thing. It's such self-deception. And so, it should be the actual opposite of that. So I think where it gets it, it's the idea to go, well, did Jesus say this was true? Well, hold on to that. And when you fall short of that, well, his grace is sufficient to help you go fight for that truth again. And what I said earlier. And so I think, if you find yourself, man, I'm talking the truth all the time, or, when you find yourself with a little, maybe not a lot of compassion for people around you who are falling short of the truth, I think that's an indicator maybe you're leaning towards truth too much.
Yeah.
If you find yourself kind of and this would just be my opinion, you may have a different opinion, but kind of in the current of culture, and the current of culture is like, do whatever you want, do whatever makes you happy. Doesn't God just love you? Doesn't God just want you to be happy? So then truth is like, well, where's truth? Well, truth is absent. Now it's just all grace, because it's just all the, if you find yourself in those kind of streams, if you will, I think you're going too far on grace.
Yeah.
I think you've forgotten the truth and the importance of the truth and the reason truth exists.
I would add to that too. I think a lot of times we find ourselves leaning too far into grace when we're asking questions like, how close can I get to sin without actually sinning?
Sure. Yeah.
We're looking for as much grace as possible, but we don't really want to deal with the truth of okay, when you're asking that question, you're probably ignoring, the truth in the first place. And I think people can do that with family stuff too. They can kind of compromise on certain things, certain boundaries, or things like that in family that lead them down a path that's ultimately damaging for the family, because they went, how close can I get? Hoping that grace would fill in the gaps.
Sure. And there's I would say the last piece of this, I think Jesus in the Bible are really clear on the truth. I think it's we try to make it so confusing and so convoluted, and I do think there needs to be context. I do think there needs to be the hermeneutic, which is the science of interpretation of Scripture. I think that needs to be in place so we don't begin heresy and all these false teachings. But I think for the most part, somebody who goes, I wonder what Jesus said was true here, you can find it. And he said it for a reason, and he said it for you and for the benefit of you. And there's such freedom and liberation and adventure found on the other side of that truth. So I think that's at play. I think grace is at play to help you continue to fight for that truth. They are interdependent. You cannot separate them. But I also think there are moments in life that are really, really hard to tell. And those are what we've talked about before, where I just say, open your palms and invite God into that space. I think it's good to invite counsel and invite wisdom and invite counselors and invite pastors and all, but invite God into that space and ask him that question. God, what is true and what is grace?
Yeah.
God, what would you have me do here in this situation? This is really, really hard, and it seems a little bit more gray, somewhere in between. And it seems kind of the woman caught in adultery. The story I shared. Jesus, what do I do here? And Jesus was so brilliant. There was another option he provided. To where grace and truth was seen all at the same time. So I think in life, if you're listening, I do think there are some. I don't want to compromise on the truth, but there are some, areas of life. If you find yourself stuck, then I would just say, pull over on the side of the road, go into your room, go on the back porch, open your palms, and take some deep breaths and just say, Jesus, please show me what grace and truth look like in this situation. What's my way forward? And invite him in. And that's a prayer God will answer. Maybe not in that 5-minute moment, but you just keep at it, and he'll answer that. He's for you.
Yeah.
And he'll provide what is grace and what is truth in that moment.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to end our podcast. That was good. We're going to be jumping into part 2 of Family Filters this coming Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
And I know you got some big plans, exciting things.
So big.
Yeah. Exciting things planned for Sunday. So
Vin Diesel big.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Not Van Diesel, but Vin Diesel big.
Now I'm that word stuck in my mind. That's why I keep saying
it. Yeah. You're going to say Van Diesel on stage one day. I can guarantee. Yeah.
Probably.
Anyways, we're pumped about part 2 of Family Filters. And for those of you listening and watching, we will see you guys on Sunday.
Thank you, man.